You hear that fire roaring, campers? That means this is episode 10 of Campfire Ghost Stories, and we are back for part 2 of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Now, when we last left, the private lives of Betty and Barney had just been exploded into the big, wide world thanks to an anonymous leak from a close friend. Once they realized that their story was being torn apart, put back together, embellished, and just, well, pretty much fantastical, the Hills had decided to tell their story themselves and to put to bed all of those made-up stories that were being spread. The Interrupted Journey, 2 Lost Hours Aboard a UFO, The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill, was written by John G. Fuller. Mr. Fuller was a New England-based American author who wrote a number of books and even a few playwrights. He was a firm believer that there was something out there, and he apparently had a mysterious knack for getting his hands on government documents to support his theories. Of course, this was before the Freedom of Information Act, so the things that he got was really something. Bottom line, John G. Fuller was about getting to the truth, and he wouldn't have signed his name on Betty and Barney's story if he didn't believe that their story was true. Now, with the help of a psychiatrist, Betty and Barney were able to piece together those missing 2 hours, and their story was written by a respectable author on the subject. However, the Hills still faced backlash and accusations. Some believed it was just a way for a bored suburban couple to give their lives a little bit of spice. Others thought it was due to the fact that they were a biracial couple living in a mostly white state. Now, where would aliens come into play? I don't know, but that was one theory. Through hypnosis, Betty remembered asking where the aliens had flown from. She recalled the aliens' response was, "Since you don't know where you are, there wouldn't be any point in telling you where I am." However, Betty was able to remember a map she had seen and was able to recreate it, at least to the best of her recollection. Interestingly enough, a school teacher from Ohio read their book and was instantly intrigued at the thought of pinpointing the location of the alien stomping ground. Marjorie Fish was an elementary school teacher and amateur astronomer. Marjorie made a risky assumption. She assumed one of the 15 stars Betty had drawn represented our sun. She then created a 3-dimensional model of nearby stars that were sun-like. Then, using thread and beads and studying distances of thousands of different vantage points, Marjorie found an actual match. About 39 light years away is the double star system Zeta Reticuli. A double star system is when a pair of stars that appear close to each other when viewed from Earth. With this discovery, she sent her analysis to Walter Webb, an astronomer and investigator at the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP. He agreed with the findings and sent her mapped coordinates to Terence Dickinson. He was an editor of the magazine Astronomy. Now, Dickinson did not vouch for Fisher's findings, but instead, he published the article and encouraged comments and debates on the report, and discuss it with the public. For nearly a year, the public waged a war with opinions and arguments for and against Fish's star map. Even the famous Carl Sagan and Stephen Soter got involved. Now, they may not have agreed with the findings, but David Saunders, a statistician, stated that the match among 16 stars of a specific spectral type among the thousands of stars nearest a sun, and I'm quoting, is at least 1,000 to 1. So there was the potential for fish to be correct at that time in history. And with that being said, we do need to review information scientifically. Marjorie's discovery occurred in 1968, and she utilized all the scientific tools that were available for that time period. In the early 1990s, though, the European Hipparcos, which I might be saying that incorrectly, but it was basically a scientific satellite, and it measured the distances of thousands of stars. It concluded that some of the stars, in Fish's interpretation of her map, were way farther away than previously thought. Additional research showed that some stars Fish determined to be inhabitable could in fact be habitable, and some that she deemed possible for housing life in fact could not. All of this led to Fish herself rejecting her hypothesis in a public statement, which to me it's really big of her. I can imagine the fear that she probably felt standing up there and announcing that, even though she had the best of intentions, she wasn't trying to lie. She was, going off of the information she knew at that time. But however, with new scientific, discoveries and new scientific tools, it turns out that her prediction was in fact incorrect. And I think it's really big of her that she did that. Now, throughout the years, the Hills stuck to their story, no matter how hard skeptics attacked their story. In fact, Betty, who we can all agree was more accepting of the encounter, claimed that she had been visited multiple times after that first visit in 1961. Now, Barney had wanted to become an engineer when he was younger. He had an astonishing IQ of 140. The only thing holding him back was the racism of those doing the hiring. In fact, he was told that he would never get a career as an engineer because of the color of his skin. So he then enlisted in the Army as a marksman and also a driver. When he was wounded, he became a postman. So I find it hard that a man with that level of intelligence and the bravery to fight for civil rights would concoct a story of aliens just to get attention. The fact that they kept the story to themselves for 5 years before being forced into the spotlight should say something. Barney Hill passed away February 25th, 1969, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, at the tender age of 46, from a cerebral hemorrhage. Speculations point to the stresses he had received from the experience and backlash that caused this early death. Betty Hill died October 17th, 2004, also in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, from lung cancer. She was 85, and she never remarried. Betty had spent her life as a social worker, working tirelessly to protect children and working to help find them loving homes. Her dedication allowed her to move up in this field to a supervisory role. So both her and Barney were very rational people. They believed in rights for all. So it was very difficult for them to reveal the events of that night and then to receive the ridicule. It had to have been devastating. I also want to reiterate, Camper, that they were not the only ones reporting these odd sightings. I mentioned that the Air Force Base, the one that closed up shop 2 years later, as well as other people, reported sightings of odd lights in the sky. It wasn't just Betty and Barney. According to Project Blue Book, in 1961, there was a reported 591 sightings. Of those, 13 remain unidentified. Project Blue Book was terminated December 17th, 1969. citing all investigations of possible UFOs were evaluated and determined that there was no threat to our national security. There was no evidence that the reported sightings represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of today's scientific knowledge. And there has and was no evidence provided indicating that any sightings were extraterrestrial vehicles. So the government says nope, no aliens. But camper, let us fast forward to the year 2017, when a number of unauthorized videos of UFOs that were videotaped by our Navy was released. And then in 2018, our government, who had previously said there were absolutely no aliens around, confirmed that the images in those videos are in fact unidentified flying objects. These videos can be viewed on a number of platforms and on YouTube. In the videos, you can hear the shock and surprise of the pilots as they witness these objects in the sky flying around. And I quote, "like a ping pong ball bouncing off the wall, it would hit and then go the other way." You tell me, camper, were they all wrong or were they onto something? Now, 5 years later, September 3rd, 1965, another famous UFO event was recorded. This one in Exeter, New Hampshire, just 17 miles from where the Hills resided, commonly referred to as the Exeter Incident. Officer Bertrand, a policeman of Exeter, happened to be patrolling Route 101. It had just been a bit past midnight when he came upon a woman who was parked along the side of the road. He approached her to see if she was okay. When he reached her, she was breathless and excited and told him that she had just witnessed a flying object, one with red flashing lights, and it had been chasing her. Now she pointed to a light that was just on the horizon. The officer didn't get any goosebumps and didn't think there was anything to worry about, so he told the woman to go home. Now just a few hours later, at 2:24 a.m., 18-year-old Norman Muscarello entered the Exeter police station. He was visibly shaking and looked terrified, and stated while he was hiking down Route 150, he saw a thing as big as a house in the sky. He stated that a group of 5 lights appeared over a house, about 100 feet from where he was standing. The lights were in a line at about a 60-degree angle. They were so bright that they lighted up the area so much that he couldn't see any shape. The lights then moved out and over a large field, and they acted at times like a floating leaf. They would go down behind the trees, behind a house, and then reappear. Now, to make this more believable, Muscarello said that the lights always moved in the same 60-degree angle, but only one light would be on at a time. He said that they would pulsate in this order: 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. He states the lights were so bright he could not make out any form. He says he watched awestruck for about 15 minutes, and when the lights finally disappeared behind some trees into a field, his trance was broken and he headed for the nearest police station. Now, the same policeman who had stopped to make sure the woman was okay, Officer Bertrand, he had Muscarello take him back to where the object with the lights had been. Once there, Muscarello and the officer walked into the field. There, the officer got his own story to tell. As they stood in the field, the lights reappeared. Officer Bertrand reported that they descended on him so closely he fell to the ground, drawing his gun. He reported the same 5 lights, campers. They were so bright and flashed one at a time in the same synchronicity. Both men ran for the police car. Bertrand radioed fellow police officer David Hunt, who arrived shortly after to the scene and witnessed the same thing. All men reported that the lights eventually moved away towards the east, towards the ocean. Over the next few weeks, the police station received nearly 50 reports of UFO sightings in and around Exeter. These sightings made their way into the Look magazine on February 8, 1966. And remember author John G. Fuller, the author who wrote on Betty and Barney's experiences? Well, this incident piqued Fuller's interest as well, and in 1966 he wrote a book on the incident called Incident at Exeter. Pretty straightforward title. Now, the debunkers, which I will say, we do need skeptics to rule out the falsies, but they said it was just a light that somehow matched an Air Force KC-97 refueling plane. None of the reported incidents included anything plane-shaped, did not include any sounds of planes. And also, those lights that were mentioned do not correspond with a KC-97 fueling plane. I also can't imagine that this plane was bouncing around in a field, peeking, playing peekaboo between the trees and the officers. But what do I know? Other debunkers suggested an SAC NORAD training exercise. Now, this training exercise was confirmed, however, the timing was incorrect. The training for the NORAD exercise was between midnight and 2 a.m. When Officer Bertrand and Muscarello returned to the field, it was nearly 3. And another theory was that the men and the woman had seen a flying billboard, sort of like an ad plane, because let's be honest, the best time to advertise by a flying airplane is 2 o'clock in the morning, right? Now, there was an ad plane, however, it was reported as being grounded at that time. It also didn't have the same lights that every witness had reported seeing. Now, to round out this list of debunkers and their theories, I want to include one more, and that is weather plasma. Yes, camper, those 60-plus witnesses of UFO sightings were all caused by electrical charges coming from a high-tension power line. Air plasma followed the woman driver, chased the hiker and the policeman, bounced around and hid behind trees, and pretty much caused a ruckus on that night of September in 1965. Well, camper, that was my first UFO reporting, and it was a pretty exciting one. And maybe the aliens abide by the leave no trace practices that I mentioned in last week's episode. In any event, tell me what you think, campers. Now, since this podcast is focused around camping, campfires, ghost stories, and legends, I would love to hear your own personal ghost stories while out camping. Or, if you have a UFO sighting, I'd be interested in that as well. Please feel free to send me your personal camping stories, and they may have a chance of being shared on the podcast. Names can, of course, be omitted or changed as per your request. Let's keep the tradition of campfire ghost stories alive, and UFO sightings. You can send your experiences via email to campfireghoststories8@gmail.com. That's campfireghoststories, the number 8, @gmail.com. Happy camping!